Hello everyone, Dr. Shabazz here, and today we're going to be discussing Chapter 5, Political, Legal, and Regulatory Environment. This is one of the important elements of the framework that I discussed before, the PEST analysis. And of course, PEST is the acronym for Political, Economic, Social, Cultural, and Technological Environment. And the political environment is obviously very important because it sets the parameters of how a company operates in a foreign environment. And you might think that I have to deal with this issue, that it's going to be complicated, but the political environment is important for a couple of different reasons. Certainly, it restricts you because that's what regulations do, but it also protects not only the consumer that you may be selling to, but it also protects the company, your rights, and the protection of, for example, your intellectual property, and to ensure that somebody does not take your intellectual property and abuse it, or in some way deprive you of earnings in that market. Excuse me. So this idea of the political, legal, regulatory environment carries, a number of different implications. There's a certain level of risk that you incur whenever you do business in a foreign market. And so we'll kind of go through some of these issues, all the different types of risk, and how you can mitigate those risks. There are some methods by which you can mitigate risk. Some of them are not in the book, to be frank, but we'll go through some of those methods. So let's get started. I'm going to go through some of these slides. There are 35 slides. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but I have some additional information that I'll share with you as we're going through these slides. Let's look at politics. We kind of have an idea of what politics, and if you don't know what politics are, you would understand what political culture is. And because we've been dealing with it for the last year and a half leading up to the election, and we're talking about the election that was in November, and all of the political discourse that was being discussed in the debates, and all of the issues that came out as a result of this presidential campaign. So we look at the political environment, and we know that politics has to do with the idea that a particular body has the authority to legislate, execute, and judge. Now, of course, in this society, those are the three branches of government, right? And the type of system you have oftentimes will influence the political culture, which they defined here as the importance of the government and legal system providing a context within which individuals and corporations understand their relationship to the political system. We all as individuals, and if you're an entrepreneur, as corporate entities or company entities, have certain rights. We have certain rights that we are granted by the government, but there are also certain rules and regulations that we have to abide by to maintain those rights. So some of the issues that we often encounter in a political environment, of course, the issue of sovereignty, political risk, tax policies, threat of equity dilution, or what's called a dissolution of your company, what happens to it, even in cases of bankruptcy and bankruptcy protection, those are options. And then the risk of expropriation. That is a big word that a lot of foreign companies have to know in case the government entity says that we're going to take possession of your business and we're going to give you compensation for it. That is one of the risks in doing business in a foreign country, is the threat of expropriation, nationalization, and also confiscation. So what is sovereignty? That's a big word, a word that we don't hear every day in just average everyday life. We will hear it more in political discourse, international relations. You'll hear politicians use the word. You'll hear the ambassador use the word. The State Department official will use the word. And essentially, it is the idea that a nation has the authority to control and manage its affairs within those boundaries, within the borders of that country. Now, in this definition, it gives you a lot more detail in terms of what constitutes a sovereign state. It has some buzzwords here: free and independent, which means that you are not beholden to another country's law. If they impose that law on you, you are not beholden to that law. And that'll become important in a few minutes, and you'll see why. So it talks about regulated trade, the flow of imports. Of course, you can assess taxes, you can assess quotas, you can provide all types of protections to your citizens in the way of quality requirements, inspections, local content requirements. That is your right. When goods are coming into your country, you have the authority, because you're a sovereign nation, to protect your citizens from those goods that are coming in. You have undivided jurisdiction, and you have the ability to conduct domestic affairs without outside interference. That is very important. This definition is from Richard Stanley, the president of the Stanley Foundation. I actually looked up that organization because sometimes you read things and you kind of want to know who this is that is making these quotes. And so I kind of looked up this organization, Stanley Center for Peace and Security. Their strategic approach is to creating policy change is the product of continuous careful thought. At the core of all of our work is an unending commitment to global cooperation and collective action. So they advocate on things such as climate change, nuclear weapon, probably de-escalation, and also opposition against mass violence and atrocities. So that is the Stanley Center for Peace and Security. So this issue here about sovereignty, some believe the global market integration is eroding national economic sovereignty. When I was in graduate school, I once read an article, and I can't remember the name of the article, but I believe the author's name was Sevanandan. And it was talking about the idea that governments in today's modern world are becoming subordinated to corporations. So I kind of want to show you this reading that I did. This was Sevanandan that I mentioned. And it's very interesting because this article was written in 1980, and we're talking 40 years ago, where Sevanandan was talking about imperialism and disorganic development in the Silicon Age. And here you're talking about the dichotomy of rich versus poor nations. They talk about the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank and the IMF after World War II. And here he states capital, labor, trade were to be unshackled of their past inhibitions and the world opened up to accumulation on a scale more massive than ever before. The instruments of that expansion, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the IMF, and the World Bank were ready to go into operation. Even so, it took the capitalist nations of Western Europe, Japan, and the United States some 25 years to rid themselves of old notions of national boundaries and lift the siege against multinational enterprises so they might be permitted to get on with the unfinished business of developing the world economy. And he's quoting Rockefeller, which, as you know, is one of the influential families of great wealth. And so this article talks about the rise of the multinational corporation and the preeminence of these companies over sovereign nations, such that these corporations actually have more power. It's so interesting that you have corporations that are so big and powerful that they command or they generate more revenue than entire countries. And so this becomes an issue when you have these corporations going abroad and establishing a presence in these countries and pretty much throwing their weight around in terms of the leverage that they have in terms of doing business. And so as far as this statement is concerned, global market integration is eroding national economic sovereignty. That has some semblance of truth. These multinational corporations do have wield a lot of power, and of course, these nations do rely heavily on these multinational corporations for the economy to grow. So, the European Union, when they established the bloc in 1992, all of the member nations had to give up some sovereignty. And it started out, I believe it was 12 nations, and then it grew to 15, 16 nations, and now it's 27 in the European Union. Each of those nations has to give up a bit of sovereignty in order to benefit from this cooperation. And so it means giving up your right to print your own currency. It means you have to adhere to certain policies, economic policies, inflation, bank reserves, and all the things that come with having a stable economy. And so it says here, EU individual countries gave up their rights to national currency product standards in exchange for a better market access. So political risk. One of the things before I go on is that if you're in a foreign country, and let's say you're an entrepreneur or you have your own business, you can't avoid the political environment. You cannot. But it is best not to engage to the extent that you become entangled in local politics. You want to be a good corporate citizen, but you don't want to put yourself in the way of domestic politics, because then you end up becoming a scapegoat for many of the issues that you find in terms of politically turbulent environments. And that has happened many a time where you have these foreign entities and even foreign residents who become the scapegoat for the problems of that society. So it's best just to keep a low profile and, to have your partnerships, your joint ventures, and your lobbyists working on your behalf. And then that way you can stay free of these political entanglements. So political risk. What are some political risks? Well, there are lots of different types of political risk. And with that, before you go into a country, you'll do all these assessments. There are all of these different tables by entities such as the Institutional Investor, Standard and Poor's. You have, I believe, even World Trade Magazine used to have these risk assessments. You have the IMF and the World Bank also have documents where you can actually look at how countries are assessed. Even our own textbook has a table of corruption index, and also have one that I'll pull up and show you later, a more current one that's in the book. So it says here, when perceived political risk is high, a country will have a difficult time attracting foreign direct investment. Not only that, it will also have problems attracting corporations to establish a presence. And that's also what they mean by foreign direct investment. But it could certainly mean more than just investing in joint ventures, but it can mean a physical stake in the country. So political risk would deter that. If you have a ranking, and I'll pull up a ranking here, and I'm just going to pull up. I just searched on this, and this is what I have found. So this is from the PRS group, and you may notice I'm concerned about the source. And of course, you want to know that you're looking at reputable sources. So it says here, below is our most recent political risk index table, ranked from low risk to high risk within each region listed. And so they have 17 risk components that they've used in order to come up with these indices. And so we'll take a look at some of these. And this is up to October 2019. And as you can see, you have Canada, which is actually, it's counterintuitive. They say ranked from low to high, but the number means that the risk is lower. They have a high ranking. You know, we're talking 90, 91, 92. In Canada, that is actually a low risk. We're looking at the United States, then Jamaica, and these are all regional. And so you can kind of get an idea of how these countries are situated. Then they go to South America, and you see Chile, which has the highest ranking in terms of suitability for business. Venezuela, which is in political strife now, has the lowest. Western Europe, Norway is number one. And you can see the other nations. Italy is last. Look at Asia, Eastern Europe, Middle East, United Arab Emirates is looking pretty good, near the top. Syria is last of that group. Botswana, which is actually one of the success stories of Africa. Then South Africa, Ghana, Zambia. These are all resource-rich nations. And then below they have Zimbabwe. Now, actually, Zimbabwe used to be considered the breadbasket of Africa, and it had all of these resources. But of course, Zimbabwe was put under sanctions under the government of Robert Mugabe because of some of his policies, which essentially was dispossessing the white settlers of their land and redistributing it to Zimbabweans. There's a history of that. Zimbabwe used to be called Southern Rhodesia, and the colonialists went in and took the land from the indigenous people. When Robert Mugabe became president, he took the land back. And then after that, there were sanctions placed on Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe, and then they've suffered ever since. So Robert Mugabe has since passed away, and when he was the president of Zimbabwe, he was a firebrand. I mean, he was hated in the West. But if you look at some of his footage of some of his speeches, he was very witty, very sharp, and unrelenting in his defense of the African sovereignty of land, and in terms of the Africans' right to assert their own economic advancement. Again, he was maligned in the West, but in Africa, he was considered a hero and a freedom fighter. But if you look at their economic status, it is still looking very poor and suffering from hyperinflation. Here, East Asia, Singapore is at the top, and Myanmar is at the bottom. Recently, they had a coup. They actually took the president, who was a Nobel laureate, into custody, and now you have a military regime in power at this very moment. And so certainly that would be a place that you would avoid at all costs at this point. So looking at some of the political risks, war, as I've just stated, there's certain places that you saw on that list that would not be good places to try to establish business relationships because of the risk of not only your business being damaged, but people coming into your business, looting, being robbed at gunpoint, which has happened. When there is an uprising in a nation, certainly the foreign entities become big targets. Social unrest, fractionalized by language, ethnicity. So you have this idea of different ethnic groups fighting against each other. Minority groups sometimes are the targets, whether it be an ethnicity, whether it be a religious class, whether it be foreigners. And so that becomes one of those inherent risks that you take. Orderly political transfer. Now we look we look at the United States, and it was not an orderly transfer. And so for a period of time, a lot of investors were waiting, trying to see what was going to happen with the United States. What was going to happen with President Trump? And of course, the markets reacted once Biden was confirmed and Trump left the White House. And then the market started to react because there was an idea that it was going to be less risky with Biden in power as opposed to President Trump. So some of the other things, politically motivated violence. We saw that on January 6th again. We see it in other countries, factionalized fighting. There is a situation going on in Russia right now where Alex Navalny, who is a critic of the Russian government and President Putin, Vladimir Putin, and so you see people out in the streets protesting against his detainment, and actually he has been convicted and received a 2-year, I believe it's a 2-year sentence. And so you have people protesting against that. And some of the other things, corruption, nepotism, that is being in a government where you have family essentially controlling the affairs of the government. What are some other risks? Crime, of course, places where there's a high crime rate. If you go to essentially, the larger cities where you're going to have a presence of crime in many places. Labor cost, of course, it's a risk you take because that's more investment that you're taking on. And in addition, you have perhaps the presence of labor unions who may complain about working conditions and other types of arrangements that you have to make. So these are all risks that you incur, not to mention exchange controls, tariff barriers, quality requirements, local content requirements. For example, if you have a factory in another country, and let's say you're sourcing your materials from a neighboring country, because you've always done that. You've always imported your raw materials from this country and you've had a long relationship. But this government says, well, you're doing business here, so you have to get your raw materials from us. That is a local content requirement, which may mean that you have to cut ties with that supplier and then pick up a local supplier to appease the government. And so you have to make that decision. Repatriation restrictions is the extent to which a foreign business in a host country can make profit and depositing their money in the bank, right, as they make the money, but then wanting to take that money out and sending it back to the home country. There are repatriation restrictions for how much you can take out. The reason being is that as a bank that's holding deposits, that money is used to invest in projects, it's used to invest in securities, it is used to provide business loans, it is used to leverage. So you have interest leverage where they pay you a certain amount of interest, a lower interest, but then they make a higher return somewhere else. So you have all of these things that banks rely on. They rely on that capital in order to use it in ways in order to earn a profit and keep the capital moving. The more your capital moves, the more your economy grows. You want that money to be going through the system. That is why you give loans to people who have good credit, because that money will move. The economy will grow, it will get stronger, and then that would mean that the banks have a good leverage. Taxation. We always hear about taxation during the political season, where this candidate says, hey, I'm going to lower taxes. And what do lower taxes do? Lower taxes would then provide a benefit for consumers and citizens because I have more disposable income. I'm paying less taxes. That means I have more money to spend. Now, taxes for imports means that the government can raise funds for operating the economy. So when you have high tariffs, that means that country that's bringing goods into your country are taxed, and then that money or that revenue is then used to, operate the government and to provide services for these citizens. And in the last 4 years, President Trump had this debate with China that President Trump contended that China was getting away with robbery because it was literally paying no taxes. So as you may recall, in the last 4 years, President Trump was threatening to assess and actually followed through taxes on China. $200 billion of Chinese imports would be assessed with taxes. And what occurred was that China countered, and they also taxed certain types of agricultural products, most notably soybeans, which is primarily used to feed the pigs. That China is a very large producer of and consumer of pork and other livestock, and so they countered with assessing the U.S. Farmers with a tax liability in terms of those soybeans coming in. And so this was kind of a back and forth, and to be honest, it was not a good situation. And why is that the case? It's the case because China holds the largest amount of American debt. And you honestly, you don't want to upset China because, and that's not to say you shouldn't be tough on China, but with them holding the largest amount of debt, American debt, they have a lot of leverage and they have a lot of ways that they can hurt America because of its indebtedness. Now here it talks about tech companies. Amazon, Google, and Apple attempt to limit tax liability by shifting location of income. This is the good old offshore banks. There are a lot of countries that are in this idea, in this specialized in offshore bank accounts. You have countries like Liechtenstein, you have Monaco, you have the Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, you have Switzerland, Cyprus. All of them are in this business of offshore banks. And it is where a lot of companies who make lots of profits will place their profits in these offshore banks to avoid taxes. Now, when President Obama came into office, he passed a legislation to prevent companies from hiding their profits overseas. And this was a treaty he had established with those countries where offshore banks were popular to ensure that these companies could not avoid taxation. Of course, companies were not very happy with that, but that was one of the things that President Obama did in his first couple of years in office. Seizure of assets, expropriation. This is when the government provides you with some compensation for your business. Compensation should be provided in a prompt, effective, and adequate manner, and it should be just. But sometimes they might give you the market rate for your business. So it's almost like a blue book in which they will determine the market value of your business and then provide that as compensation. Confiscation occurs when there's no compensation involved. Like they essentially just take your business. And that can occur in times of war and unrest when the government decides they've overthrown the previous government, which may have been friendly to you, but now this government is saying, well, we're not so friendly to foreigners, and they may allow even local citizens who also are not friendly to foreigners to have their way with your products, and in terms of intellectual property and in terms of other ways of making sure that foreign entities have a less advantageous position that would otherwise benefit them. So seizure of assets is the most extreme level of risk. So you have situations like what happened in Cuba in the late 50s, early 60s, when the embargo was slapped on. When Castro came to power, there was nationalization of American businesses. And we're talking hotels, we're talking casinos, and other types of businesses that were nationalized by the Cuban government. So essentially, these properties were taken over by the Cuban government. And thereafter, you had a lot of Cubans that left Cuba, and those who were benefiting from these industries fled to the United States. And even to this day, you hear some of the older Cubans talking about how much they hated the Castro regime. And of course, Fidel Castro passed away, and his brother Raul is no longer in power, but those feelings are still prevalent. If you go to South Florida and you talk to those who come from Cuba, they will tell you that whole history. But of course, if you know the history of Cuba, it's a lot more complicated than what it appeared. Before Castro, you had Fulgencio Batista, who was very friendly with the United States and who actually encouraged casinos, or of course gambling, encouraged hotels for tourism, encouraged prostitution. Of course, Cuba is a very beautiful place. I've traveled there. It's some of the most beautiful beaches. It has a wonderful culture. The people are great. The music is great. And so Americans used to go there for vacation. And not only Americans, but you had Russians, you had Europeans that would go there for, for, fun in the sun, so to speak, which included prostitution. And many of those industries were protected by the government because it was bringing in revenue. Now, when Castro came to power, he did not like the fact that the prostitution industry was thriving and that Cuban women were being dishonored in that way. So he essentially shut that down and then took possession of the hotels, closed down the brothels, closed down the casinos, and all the other things that made Cuba famous. A little side note, the reason that Las Vegas was created was because of the fact that that Cuban playground was shut down. And so Las Vegas Strip was created as a place where Americans can go and have get their gambling on and all the other things that we know Vegas to be famous for. Nationalization, a government takes control of some or all of the enterprises in an entire industry, and that's what happened in Cuba. The entire hotel industry and some of these other industries were totally nationalized. It's acceptable according to international law if it satisfies a public purpose. And so these were justified as a public good when Castro came to power, and includes adequate payment. Now, that was the contention, that the Cuban government did not provide adequate compensation. And so the difference between expropriation and nationalization is expropriation means someone can take a business and provide you compensation. Nationalization is when it involves an entire industry. So the hotel industry, or say the computer industry, or let's say the mining industry, the entire industry can be taken over by the government. So when the government takes over an industry, that's nationalization. When the government then sells off pieces of an industry, that is called privatization, and it is said to make that industry much more efficient than when a government operates it, because of the bureaucracy that often bogs down industries that are government run. These are different types of expropriation and the seizure of assets. All of these things that are barriers to doing business abroad. And you might even say, why go through all this trouble? Why go through all of these risks, repatriation of profits and royalties, increased local content laws that I mentioned earlier, price controls? In Germany, Walmart goes into Germany, and Walmart is everyday low pricing. You go there for low prices. So Walmart goes to Germany and they state you have to raise your prices. It's a price control mechanism because we want to make sure that our local business people can compete. Because if you come in with low prices, you're going to undercut the local businesses, and then they're not going to be able to stay in business. And if they're not able to stay in business, that means it's bad for the foundation of Germany, because then it becomes foreign controlled, and now we will be relying on a foreign entity for our sustenance. So that's the reason for the protectionist, these protectionist measures that are put in place that may include price controls and tariffs and non-tariff barriers and all of these other items. Discriminatory laws on patents and trademarks. One of the issues of when we talk about patents and trademarks, there was a case on China that was brought about by the U.S. on behalf of Microsoft that accused China of allowing their copyrighted software to be copied and pirated. And so they went to the WTO, or the US went to the WTO on behalf of Microsoft, and China was found in contempt of trade laws, and they had to show where they were putting in measures to help protect intellectual property. I'm not sure if there was a fine involved in that, but certainly that was an issue in China then, and it's an issue now in terms of intellectual property. I am actually going to play a video right now that shows you how egregious that some of the violations are of intellectual property. And this video is called The 15 Worst Knockoffs. And it's a bit humorous, and I like this video because it shows you the extent to which people will go to steal or profit off of the trademarks of other corporations. So let's take a look at this.
Danger Dolan. From everyone's favorite mighty mutant power turtles to the always refreshing Dr. Becker soft drink, we count 15 craptacular knockoff products from around the world. Number 15. Knockoff Starbucks. Nothing says capitalism, I mean America, like Starbucks coffee. The coffee house's chain has been a global powerhouse since the 1980s and has sprouted locations all over the world. But this hasn't stopped a whole slew of imitators from riding Starbucks coattails and trying to make a quick buck. Check out China's Sunbucks coffee, which uses the famous Starbucks logo design for its own selfish ends. Starbucks and Buckstar coffee commit the exact same crime, as does USA Bucks coffee, which I hear is in the running for a subtlety award. Starbucks has a long history of taking imitators to court, so you best think twice before opening that Snarbucks coffee joint. In 2014, Comedy Central's Nathan Fielder opened a Los Angeles coffee house called Dumb Starbucks Coffee. It caused quite a stir, but was ultimately revealed to be part of a television publicity stunt. The suits were not amused. Number 14. Imitation Toys. They say imitation's the sincerest form of flattery, but there's not much that's flattering about these baffling toy knockoffs. Guaranteed to fall apart within a half hour of opening, these future junk heap liners spread disappointment wherever they are found. Check out New Style Ninja Tortoise, a bastardization of the I can't believe it's still going Ninja Turtles franchise. I'd hate to be the poor kid who opens this sucker at Christmas. Thanks for listening to me for the last 11 months, Dad. New Style Ninja Tortoise is just what I wanted. There's also the Mighty Mutant Power Turtles, which is what you would end up with when Power Rangers and Ninja Turtles drink too much wine together. The Star Wars franchise has some doozy knockoff toys too, including Laser Sword, which is like a lightsaber, only lamer, and Star Knight, which appears to be a Vader moonlighting as a camp scooter-tooting police officer. Very European. Finally, every unloved child should own a Robert Cop too. No, he's not Raymond's police officer brother from Everybody Loves Raymond, but he's just as surly. Number 13. Not quite right confectionery. Everybody loves to indulge in their favorite confectionery item, but sometimes you just don't feel like paying for those premium brand prices. You should though, cause imitation brands just aren't very good. Ask anyone who's traveled to Southeast Asia. They usually taste like cardboard, and you got a 70% chance of fighting a syringe or band-aid when you reach into the packet. These knockoffs deserve points of creativity though. I mean, M&M ripoffs called S&Ms. Now that's a gateway candy. You've also got sour frittles, which on account of sounding like an STD, are a whole lot less appetizing. Oreo's imitators are Boreos and Cream Betweens, which ooze pun potential. Interestingly, Oreos themselves are knockoffs of the original sandwich biscuit, Hydrox. But Hydrox sounds like a water boss in a Zelda game and is unmarketable. Thus, Oreos win. Number 12. Imitation butter knockoffs. The J.H. Filbert Company had no idea what a phenomenon their hilariously named butter substitute, I can't believe it's not butter, would create. I can't believe it's not was the pun of the 90s. It was referenced in countless sitcoms and sounds like something Chandler would have riffed on. They even had Fabio in their commercials. Just stellar stuff, guys. Of course, the imitators soon took notice, and along came the astonished English of unbelievable, this is not butter. Forgiveness, please. ASDA's fantabulous, you'd butter believe it, and Golden Soft's timid, unsure, could it be butter? Honorable mentions also include what? Not butter, and butter, it's not. Number 11. Imitation soft drinks. All around the world, small-scale beverage companies struggle in the sugary shadows of behemoths like the Coca-Cola Company. What's the little guy to do? Why, shamelessly replicate brand likeness, of course. To give you an idea of the sheer scope of these imitations, here's a list of international Mountain Dew knockoffs. Mountain Lightning, Mountain W, Mountain Rapids, Mountain Frost, Mountain Shoutin', Mountain Explosion, Mountain Lion, and Wild Mountain. Just reading them feels like I've climbed a mountain. Here's a similar list of Dr. Pepper, Dr. Bob, Dr. Thunder, Dr. Skipper, Dr. Fine Soda, Dr. Perky, Dr. Snap, Dr. Perfect, Dr. Becker, Dr. Bold, and Dr. Right. I'm not sure any of these are real doctors. I certainly wouldn't confide in Dr. Thunder or Dr. Right. Maybe Dr. Right. Pepsi is also kind of a crap knockoff of Coke, but that one's up for debate. Number 10. Skirple. Invented in 1964, Sharpies are the number one permanent marker in the world. They're so iconic their name has become synonymous with the product as a whole. That's what Hoovers are to vacuum cleaners and aspirin is to paracetamol. Skirples are Chinese knockoffs that replicate the Sharpie packaging, but will probably bleed ink all over the insides of your bag. The name also sounds like an as yet unidentified STD. Other Sharpie imitators include the Super Richeng, Goodwill's Super Superstar, and Hongbao's Super Stunyon. Number 9. Knockoff sportswear. Everyone wants to look cool when they're doubled over from a jog to the corner store, or running from their neighbor's frighteningly aggressive miniature fox terrier. Sportswear companies know this. It's why they set such exorbitant prices. They want you to work hard for their goods. They want you to sweat. It's no wonder then that consumers turn to imitation brand wear like Adidas, Heike, Knoverse, and Fuma. Their prices are comparatively low and can conveniently pick them up from your nearest black market. Sure, the quality leaves a lot to be desired, but who wants sneakers that last longer than 2 weeks? That's unnatural. Slap on that pimp hat, shameless reimagining of Puma, lace up those Ball Star classics and help out the little guy. If you're struggling to remain motivated, remember the high-key motto, just do that thing you said you would do. Number 8. Knockoff car designs. Copycat car design is a serious first world problem. It's also the root of many legal battles. Check out the Great Wall's Cooler, which apes the slim, purely electric Renault Twizy, pretty much down to the last detail. And look, Attack of the Clones, the BAIC X424, gracefully borrows elements of Jeep's Wrangler and Cherokee, without saying thank you. This pandemic continues with the Geely GE, which made its motor show debut in 2009. Lawyers at Rolls-Royce no doubt salivated when the Phantom aping GE was unveiled. The GE replicates many of the Phantom's aesthetics, including its iconic upright grille. It was also set to retail for $220,000 less than its forerunner. Its striking likeness made it an attractive alternate for cheapskates. It could have really affected Rolls-Royce's sales if they'd just let it slide. Fortunately, Rolls-Royce's big strong lawyers hit the case and Geely was ordered to do a comprehensive redesign. Number 7. Mockbusters are low-budget imitations of popular Hollywood films. Made by small studios, their release dates closely follow those of the films they're ripping off. This insidious strategy works particularly well with children's films. The filmmakers obviously hope to profit from parents' confusion. Some of these knockoffs are hilariously shameless. Atlantic Rim apes 2013's Pacific Rim, Apocalypse Z reimagines World War Z, Transformers becomes Transmorphers, and Kung Fu Panda becomes Chop Kick Panda. Some bootlegs are hilariously bad too. Who can forget such classics as Pepe Likes Tacos? Number 6. Knockoff video game consoles. There's a rich tradition of knockoff video game consoles dating back to the early success of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Back then, video games were primarily for children, so it was easier for manufacturers to fool unsuspecting parents into buying their kids a brick gaming system. It's not all bad though. Some of these consoles can play or emulate retro games, sometimes from multiple systems. In lieu of buying genuine retro systems, this can be a cheap and easy way to experience game libraries from past systems. Still, for the most part, this is shameless money grabbing. These knockoff systems show how crazy cash-ins can become when copyright laws aren't enforced. Number 5. Knockoff electronics and appliances do big business, particularly in China and Taiwan. Manufacturers prey on consumer ignorance by copying the aesthetics and design choices of other well-known and respected products. These counterfeit devices are usually slow, buggy, poorly built, and cause immense frustration for the user. I mean, come on. Why can't my Nokia iPhone Galaxy 7 play Angry Birds? As with knockoff toys and movies, the impersonations are waver thin. In many cases, manufacturers barely go to any effort to create their abominations, nor do they obscure the fact they're ripping off multi-million-dollar companies' products. Check out the Obama-endorsed BlackBerry, the iPod Mini Swirl, and Hypnoho 6. It's lucky Homer knows a genuine Panaphonics when he sees one. Number 4. Fast food knockoffs. America's mighty fast food chains are admired and sloppily copied all over the world. Although the US and Iran have no diplomatic relations, some Iranian restaurant owners have tried to emulate American fast food franchises. Iran's Pizza Hut rips off Pizza Hut's menu and IT company Red Hat's logo all at once. Their McDonald's restaurant is the closest emulation of America's preeminent food empire, with locations in over 3 cities. McDonald's serves hamburgers and hot dogs, but curiously no mashed potato. McDonald's has many great imitators like McKebab and McDack, but China's Pizza is the place to go if you want your pizza garnished with herbs other than oregano. Number 3. Counterfeit fashion. Designer clothes are expensive. This is a fact of life. Knockoffs are cheap, but they're tacky, low quality, and are usually manufactured in developing countries. Knockoff fashion creates a negative stigma, but some of it looks real enough that the consumer will risk exposure. It's a bit like the uncanny valley. Fake garments look nice only from afar. Overseas, fake watches and handbags sell like gangbusters. Tourists eat them up, hoping to project wealth and prosperity. We only have the Kardashians to blame. Counterfeit goods aren't subject to corporate quality control or government safety standards, so they could tear, fall apart, or even kill you. Online unscrupulous vendors have been taken advantage of bargain hunters by posting ads featuring beautiful dresses at a pittance. However, when the dresses arrive, they look nothing like the pictures. The proportions are often wrong, the craftsmanship is bad, and the fabric is almost never the same. The phenomenon is known as false advertising. Number 2. Imitation brand cereal disasters. Knockoff cereal brands reside on the lowest rungs of the supermarket breakfast aisle, a perfect eye level for confused toddlers. Their packages are bright and big, their cartoon mascots are terrifying, and their names are teasingly similar to more established cereal brands to evoke a connotation of quality. I wish the sun would rise right now so I could have a delicious bowl of circus balls. Number 1. Knockoff alcohol brand. Fake liquor is a growing and dangerous trade. Since it does not go through the usual rigorous commercial safety tests, counterfeit alcohol could be lethal to consume. In China, fake alcohol is made from bases that can strike the heart and kidneys, potentially cause blindness by attacking the retinal nerve. Fortunately, not all alcohol knockoffs are dangerous. Some are just no-frills versions of popular existing brands. Admiral Nelson is a cheaper knockoff of the popular Captain Morgan spice rum. Interestingly, the real Nelson and Morgan were mariners. Nelson was a British naval officer who died in battle during the Napoleonic Wars. In order to preserve his body on the boat ride home, they put him in a barrel of, you guessed it, rum. Think of that next time you wet your whistle with his namesake. Looking for other quality knockoff brand alcohol? Try John's Daphne's Old Time Number 1 brand quality tenderness sour mash whiskey, or Johnny Workers, who I think is the slower cousin of Johnny Walker. Capexing Red Labial's Scotch whiskey. Yes, Labial. Don't know either. I hear it goes down smooth though. That's it for this countdown. Have a good one!
So there you saw an example of, or several examples of, and how many different markets were affected by this blatant copyright violation. And so certainly you want a country where international law is respected. There are certain treaties that countries sign, like certain conventions. The Paris Convention is one such treaty that countries have signed on, which provides companies, foreign companies, with protection in terms of copyrights, trademarks, and patents. I'm going to share with you one more case, and I don't want you to judge me and think that, well, where's he reading all these stories from? But anyway, I'm going to tell you this case. It's a real case. Happened in Nigeria, where this man who had 6 wives was apparently favoring the youngest of the 6 wives, giving her more attention, maybe materially and also romantically. And so the other 5 wives were very upset at what was happening and the fact that they weren't getting the equal attention that was probably due to them in that arrangement. And of course, when you have polygamous societies and polygamous households, it's not about sex. It's about a commune. It's about building something. But this soon became about sex, because what happened was the 5 women decided that they were going to set upon this husband to teach him a lesson. So what happened? They took hold of them. They took hold of him, and each of them forced him to have sex relations with all of them. And this repeated, and they repeated because they thought they were teaching him a lesson. And so the guy died. He actually died because, and they were laughing while this was going on. And it says, the headline, 6 women allegedly raped their husband to death in Nigeria. That was the headline. And it's sensational because you never think about this type of a case, because it's probably not in any code book. How do you rule in that case? Do you indict these women? Do you convict them? Well, probably not. I don't know what happened in that case, but I doubt if the women were indicted and convicted for that. It's one of those things. But be that as it may, yeah, you have code, you have common and civil law. You also have Islamic law. You've heard of the Sharia, and you've heard right-wing pundits talk about Sharia law. This country is going to be taken over by Sharia law, and we have to stop the Muslims from doing this, and because we're going to be chopping off heads and arms. And Sharia law is a very, very extensive code of Islamic law. It's not just punishment, but it covers everything. It covers domestic relations, it covers child support, it covers divorce, it covers property, it covers all types of laws that involve everyday life. So that is what the Sharia, and the Sharia is based on the teachings of the Quran, and it governs the conduct of the government that uses the Sharia law. When Sharia law, this is all laid out, and these code books are very, very extensive. So when people say Sharia law, it's not just, okay, we're going to chop off your ear, chop off your nose, and stone you, and do all of these things that you hear about in the media, but it governs everyday life when there's a conflict, even if it means there's a divorce settlement or there's child support. these laws will tell you this is what happens in that case. Or in the case that somebody dies, then what happens with inheritance and where the line of succession may go. And so all of these things fall under, when we talk about forbidden practices, haram, which means something forbidden, versus halal, which means that which is accepted in Islam. So you have Islamic law. And you also have, it's not mentioned here, but you have Jewish law, which is not the law of Israel, because you have more of reformist laws that apply to all of society, but you have Orthodox Jewish law, or Orthodox Jews that follow certain laws of the Torah, and they adhere to it very strictly. And I mentioned the case about McDonald's and allowing these kosher restaurants. I think about 20 kosher restaurants are in Israel to distinguish those from the McDonald's that do not have kosher menus, such as cheeseburgers where you're mixing meat and dairy products, which is illegal under Orthodox law, and other certain types of foods that are not to be ingested from certain animals, including pigs, which is also the same as in Islam. I just showed you a video on intellectual property and how all that plays out when we talk about the patents and trademarks and the certain mottos it mentions here, emblems. All of these things have to be secured, and that government has to ensure that your intellectual property is secured. Otherwise, you go through legal entanglement, and that's not where you want to be. There you have the counterfeiting and piracy, things that we're seeing in that video. Here are some of the different offices that are charged with protecting intellectual property. You have the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization as well. Firms exploit loopholes by patent laws by filing for patent protection before entering the market. I'm going to give you another case here. It's a very interesting case. And it has to do with not necessarily intellectual property, but it kind of shows you how some companies can circumvent barriers. Japan in the 90s was a rising computer manufacturer. They had all these IBM clones. IBM was the leading computer manufacturer at the time. And they launched this IBM PC, and they were flying off the shelves because it was this new thing. Instead of having these big mainframes, you miniaturize this device, and now you can store things on your desktop. And that was kind of the big thing in the 90s. And so other companies started looking at this wave of this technology, and they started replicating these computers. They called them IBM clones. And so there were a lot of cheap clones coming out of Hong Kong and Taiwan and Japan. And so they would make these computers. And so to avoid the flood of the market, the US market with these cheap clones, the US assessed tariffs. They increased tariffs by some ridiculous amount to avoid these products from coming in. And so what happened was a Japanese company decided that under the definition of these computers coming in, they decided that they were going to beat this. They took the chip out of all of their computers, or not really took the chip out. They didn't put the chip in. So they had the cargo of chips and everything else that a computer has. But without the chip, it's not a computer. And so they sent all the materials over to the United States, and by that definition, it's not a computer, and also sent the chips separately. When both of these items, cargo, gets on the other side, they then put the chip inside of the computer. And they've avoided that tax because of the fact that under the definition, a computer is not a computer unless it has a microchip in it. And so when they sent them separately, they had a tax on the microchips and they had a tax on the computer parts, but they did not have a high tax on the computer models. And so when the components crossed the border, they then put the chips into the chassis, the computer body, and then beat the tax, and then was able to compete in that market with these cheap clones. These cheap clones lasted for a little while, but the quality just wasn't there, and eventually companies like Compaq and Apple and even IBM ended up getting out of the market later on. But you had all of these companies that rose, like Gateway was one of these companies that rose, and now you have others like Asus and Hewlett Packard started making computers. They were originally known for printers, but then they started getting into computers as well. And so you have a lot of intellectual property now that is flooding the market. There you have the Paris Convention that I mentioned, some other treaties. Antitrust, which is to avert monopolies, the anti-competitive monopolies. And so this is the idea of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 that prohibits monopolistic activities, restrictive business practices including fixing prices, limiting production, allocating markets, and other schemes designed to limit or avoid competition. They don't have the word monopoly on this page, but that's exactly what they're referring to. And then, of course, licensing, trade secrets, including, when we talk about licensing, one of the modes of licensing is franchising, which means that if you are a McDonald's franchisee, you have the license that you've been afforded to use all of their patents, their manual for how to make French fries, how to make a hamburger, what the process is. All of that those are trade secrets. And you as a franchisee get a chance to use those. And yes, making McDonald's French fries has it is patented. And here's the patent I'm showing you behind me. This is the patent for making McDonald's French fries that you as a franchisee have a right to. Coming to America 2 is coming out in March. And you remember Coming to America, the first Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall movie, where they worked at a place called McDowell's. And McDowell's was basically a knockoff of McDonald's, where they had stolen all of the trademarks, and they actually showed John Amos, I think it was Akeem who went in the back, and he saw John Amos looking through a McDonald's manual, and he kind of put it away like, okay, he didn't want anybody to see him looking through a McDonald's manual because, of course, it was illegal what he was doing. But it was a comedy, and it was a very, very interesting movie. And you should actually watch the first one because it has a lot of cross-cultural issues. It's funny, but there's a lot of cross-cultural lessons to be learned in Coming to America, the first one, and the second one is coming out in March. Be interesting to see if it'll stack up with the first one. Bribery and corruption. Bribery and corruption. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act was passed in 1977. I have and I'll just show you, I had bookmarked it, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977. This is it. And it covers, well, I shouldn't say it covers, but it forbids you from accepting bribes. It says here, enacted for the purpose of making it unlawful for certain classes of persons and entities to make payments to foreign government officials to assist in obtaining or retaining business. And so this is an overview of it, but just to show you how voluminous this thing is, I'll give you an idea of the actual document. And I'll just kind of scroll through it. This is the actual legislation that was passed through Congress, and I'll just go through and just show you how lengthy it is. And it covers everything. I do want to share with you a case as I close. There's always a case, and we started out talking about sovereignty, and we know what sovereignty is. Now, sovereignty is the laws that will provide a government with the authority to manage its affairs within its borders. There was a case involving Walmart, and I'll show you this one as I close. This is a case involving Walmart Canada. Now, this case had a situation where Walmart Canada was selling Cuban products, in this case, Cuban pajamas. So an executive goes to this Walmart and he sees these products on the floor. So he goes to the manager of the Walmart and say, you have to take those items off the floor because they are in violation of the embargo. Of course, the U.S. has an embargo on Cuban products. This is an American company, and so if this was in the United States, it would be forbidden. But they're in Canada, and so the Canadians said, okay, they took the pajamas off the floor and conferred with their lawyers. The lawyers came back and said that we are within our rights to have these pajamas in our store. Why? Because we fall under Canadian law. Even though you have an embargo on Cuba, that is outside of your jurisdiction to extend that to Canada. So that is called extraterritoriality. It's a long word, but it essentially means that the U.S. is going beyond their territory in enforcing this law. And so the Cubans put the pajamas back on the floor, and Walmart had to leave them alone. And so that's an example of, when we talk about jurisdiction, we talk about sovereignty, and we talk about all those things that law does to protect not only the companies within those borders, but also the country itself. Okay, that's all I'm going to talk about today, and I want to give you time to kind of to relax and perhaps let this soak in. It's a lot of material when you talk about the legal environment, and it certainly should be lessons that you can take away, particularly the last case with Walmart in Canada. And it's something that I have remembered. You can see this case was in 1997, and I always use this case in my classes because I think it is a classic case of overreach on the part of American governments, and sometimes they extend their reach, particularly to countries that don't have the leverage. Like in this case, Canada has a lot more leverage because it is the largest trading partner to the United States. So it comes with that risk that you're going to damage that critical relationship. Okay, so make sure that you go through the material in Chapter 5. I am working on getting someone to come and address us in marketing analytics. And if I'm not able to do that, then we'll go on to Chapter 6 and discuss marketing analytics. And, I'm also working on a guest speaker for March the 11th, and it looks like it's going to happen. And they will address us when we're dealing with international branding here. Okay, have a good day, and I'll be seeing you later on in the week. Take care.